I'm Pat Dooris. Welcome to the story. Welcome to this warm Friday evening. You know, historically, the Portland area has had its share of political mavericks who are not afraid to speak out and push back against powerful interests. Tom McCall did that when he was a broadcaster right here at KGW, and then again later when he was governor in the early 1970s. In Portland City Hall, another maverick is emerging. His name is Rene Gonzalez. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be a Tom McCall or he's going to be the next governor, but he is very much like Tom McCall, pushing back against powerful interests. These particular interests are the advocates who defend the homeless in our streets. Tonight, Gonzalez's thoughts for improving Portland make up our big story. Tom McCall gave Oregon the first bottle bill in the nation, which required a deposit way back in 1971. Powerful corporate interests fought that. They were very much against it, but he didn't care. He pushed it through and it happened anyway. Now, Rene Gonzalez, a Portland City Commissioner, in office just about 4 months, is pushing back against those who like the status quo for the homeless situation. It's earned him the anger of some of the employees that he oversees as the Public Safety Commissioner. I recently talked with him about his actions and his outlook for Portland's future. Okay, speaking of Portland street response, even just this past weekend, there's been news stories about people quitting in protest because you're forcing them to be there when the city is doing sweeps. So what's going on there? Are you misusing that agency?
No, so we know that for a certain percentage of those that are impacted by sweeps, at that moment, it's, emotionally, it can be a significant emotional event, right?
That's been their home, those are their friends, they know that place.
That's right. And, and just to be clear for your listeners, before a campus swept, there's some sort of notice given anywhere from 24 to longer periods of time. So it's not a surprise when the city shows up to sweep those camps. They're notified well in advance of it in almost every case, unless there's some immediate risk to, if there's a true emergency that will sweep more quickly, but in general, there's a couple of days advance notice typically. But still, for a certain percentage, it is a moment of emotional distress, and Portland Street Response real purpose is to avoid police interactions with those on our street at a time of emotional distress. So that's why we're doing it. The folks doing the cleanups have repeatedly asked that Portland Street Response be there when those suffering from mental illness or otherwise just distraught in that situation demonstrate a need for some support. And I understand the concerns from some in Portland Street Response that
they say that it's causing more, and that as they are there, that gets imprinted on them, kind of.
Yeah, the way I look at it, we all have to do this as a parent, right? Sometimes we have to tell someone no. Doesn't mean I don't love you, doesn't mean I don't care about you, but we have to wear both hats as a grown-up and as an adult. And so that's why I disagree. I understand the concern at some level, but that's where we are in Portland, I think, at this point in time. We will continue to be a compassionate city. I love that about Portland. At the same time, we have to sometimes say no, and that's true for your city government. And the reality for, particularly in our form of government with division of labor between the city, county, and state, the city is left to be the first responder, is left to be the one that has to address camps directly. Sometimes we have to tell people no in the city of Portland. That doesn't mean we're turning our back on compassion and connecting them with services and trying to find a way to get them into our social services. And so that's, I understand the concern. I take it seriously, but on balance, I think we have to do both at the same time. Sometimes tell them no, but connect them with services to get them in a better place.
So you're not changing your mind on that one?
No.
Okay. So what I think he's saying is it doesn't really matter whether the folks working at Portland Street Response agree with sweeps or not. Their job is not to set city policy, basically. Their job's to be available when people are having a mental health crisis. And sometimes that happens during sweeps of camps, and that's why they need to be there then. We also talked more in depth about mental health and the closing of Damish. That's the state mental hospital that closed back in 1995.
All we did was take a certain segment of our mentally ill, initially drive them into jails, and then after that, drive them onto the streets of Portland. And it's like, we've never fixed the problem. And you throw in addiction, you throw in, I think our compassion in the city of Portland and in the state sometimes gets used against us. I think
there's lots of services and lots of money.
And just the mindset, I think that we've developed this reputation nationally that, if they're tough on you in Idaho, it's going to be a lot easier in Oregon, and in particular Portland, if you want to camp outside and use hard drugs. And I think that we're going to have to reset that before we're going to make any meaningful dent in this. I also, at the same time, think we need to make the upstream investments that a lot of politicians like to talk about. I actually agree with a lot of them. Every dollar that we invest intelligently in addiction services and mental illness, I'm supportive of it. It's can't just be harm reduction, which has its own purpose, but if we're building beds and we're finding ways to treat, I'm all for it. I believe in that part of it. I also think economic activity and economic opportunity in the region is crucial. Folks have to make enough to be able to afford housing here, and we do have to address housing supply. But even if we do those things, I still think we're going to have a certain segment of our population that is going to end up on the streets. And my main thing is I just want to be careful that we're not attracting too much of it to the city relative to our neighbors.
And that brings up an interesting question that I hear a lot. Where are all these people living on our streets coming from? Did they grow up here? From somewhere else? I looked into that today. This is my source. It's the federally required point-in-time survey that counts homeless folks who are on the streets and others living in shelters or with friends. This report was done back in 2022, but it has the most recent numbers that are out and available. Of the 459 people living unsheltered who were contacted in Multnomah County, 34.4% reported that they are from Oregon. 62% are from somewhere outside the state. That includes Washington, California, and anywhere else you can think of. 3.5% did not answer the question. So just over a third are from Oregon, but the rest are from somewhere else. Now, getting back to our discussion with City Commissioner Rene Gonzalez, he told Portland Street Response to stop handing out tents to the homeless during the winter because it caused a fire danger, and with many homeless folks getting hurt in those tent fires. He also told street response workers to show up and help folks in crisis when the city sweeps the homeless camps. That's what we've just been talking about. But I asked about the criticism that he got for those two main moves. Some threats of protest. Certainly, we've had folks show up at City Hall. There were threats made against my home. And so all the elements that have come with being an elected official in 2023 in Portland, Oregon, that really wasn't true 4 or 5 years ago, but is true now. Got to witness all of that in the first 100 days. And, folks want to threaten your sense of security and privacy, certainly. I think it's unfortunate, but I think the city is becoming more robust in how we respond. I also got hundreds, if not thousands, of support emails. I get people who stop me all the time in the city of Portland who thank me for what I did, because it became sort of a symbolism. In substance, Portland Street Response wasn't handing out that many tents and tarps relative to others in the public realm.
Because there's still a lot of people giving out tents and tarps.
That's right. We got a lot of nonprofits that are still doing it. We still, the Joint Office on Homelessness, I think they've curtailed it a great deal, but there's still a lot of tents and tarps that came from the Joint Office on Homeless that are on our streets. But it became a little bit of a symbol for, can we stop this enablement path and really, things that we're doing with our heart, but that on balance may not really make sense. It became a symbolism to sort of, take a step back. And so I get both, I get with a lot of intensity both ways. I was walking down the street the other day and a group of senior citizens just started clapping for, it's like, and I'm not sure what they were happy about, but it was right after the tent ban. And, so we'll interpret it that way. I don't really know what they were clapping about, but it's like, so you get both sides of it.
Commissioner Rene Gonzalez says that he will keep pushing for what he thinks is right for Portland's future. One of those things is less tolerance for extreme behavior on the far right and on the far left side of the political spectrum.
You know, I think as Portlanders, we really need to take a step back and think about what we've tolerated in the political dialogue. And I guess what I'm saying is, you know, I think we have to confront some of the extremism on both sides that have really disrupted our political processes. We shouldn't tolerate it, and we've tolerated too much of that extremism on both sides. It undermines our democracy. It drives good people out of their willingness to serve. And it's allowing some really powerful institutions that can do good to be disrupted and undermined.
It was an interesting conversation. Rene Gonzalez was elected to what normally would be a 4-year term, but because of the city's form of government changing, he'll need to run again in November of 2024 if he wants to get reelected. Last night, we ran part 1 of that conversation and then asked for you for feedback on Gonzalez, and holy smokes, you did not disappoint. Eric wrote in to say, "Thank God someone is making sense about not handing out tents. I love his positions. Downtown Portland is not a campground." And Ron wrote, "It was refreshing to finally hear someone with some common sense in city government." Jackie agreed, writing in, "Finally, someone with a clue. Great story. You're answering the questions I keep asking myself. Let's elect more people like Mr. Gonzalez. He is thoughtful and decisive, something sorely missing in other elected officials."
Gonzalez is not only intelligent and responsible in his approach to the tent fire problem, but he at last is someone who has the courage to stand strong in the face of criticism. What a guy. He is my new hero.
All right. Now, not everyone agreed, but the input probably was like 85% for Gonzalez, maybe 15% against. But just to show you that we welcome all sides, here is the only negative email that came in on this. Jeff wrote in part, "It's an inhumane argument to say that a fraction of all tents experience fires, so we should deny tents to everyone. Warming centers are notoriously insufficient. Hard to imagine. We can do better than shutting down kindness toward our fellow citizens. Very disappointing decisions from a new member of our government." And someone who did not leave their name called in to also criticize the commissioner's decisions on tents.
I would like to see Gonzalez out there on the street in 25-degree weather with no tent, no blanket, and just the clothes on his back that were very thin, and see what it feels like to be a homeless person where we have tents and blankets that we can keep somebody warm with, and he refuses to let street response give them out. That's just absolutely ludicrous. He should be out there on the street seeing what it feels like.
But most comments we got last night were more like this from Susie.
I absolutely agree with Rene Gonzalez, and God bless him for taking a stand about this. We don't need to be handing out tents to everybody. We are throwing money away to these people. It's stupid. I'm tired of it. It's insanity. I do not recognize this city.
And we'll give Kathy the last word on this tonight. She emailed to say, "All I can say is thank you, Renee. Finally a sensible city council member." And thanks to each of you who took time to write or call in. I'm sorry if we didn't get a chance to use your comment. We get way more than we can use these days on the show. But we do read all the emails and we do listen to all of your voicemails. So if you have more thoughts on this, feel free to write us. The address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail. The number is 503-226-5090.
Up next on The Story. Was Pacific Power to blame for the deadly wildfires on Labor Day of 2020?
Be advised, OSP stating that power lines are coming down near Mill City.
Power lines are down across the road for those coming and going.
I copy that.
That's what a Multnomah County jury will decide over the next several weeks in a class action lawsuit that's looking for over $1 billion in damages.
There are no easy answers.
We'll take you inside the courtroom, where earlier this week, key government officials testified about the decision-making in 2020 and the feelings of regret that soon followed. When The Story returns.
This week, a mega legal battle is playing out in Multnomah County Court. 17 plaintiffs want $1.6 billion in a class action lawsuit against the power company PacifiCorp. The key question is whether the weather was to blame for 4 disastrous and deadly fires during Labor Day of 2020, or instead was it the sparking power lines from PacifiCorp that created the fires? And is the company to blame because it did not turn off the electricity? The fires was historically brutal, the most destructive in Oregon state history. 9 people died. Thousands of homes were destroyed and more than 1 million acres burned. The trial is not going to be a quick one. It just started this week and it's expected to last into June. And we're not going to be able to cover it day to day, but we are going to check in when there are some big name witnesses testifying. And this week, a pretty big name, Nick Blosser, testified. He was the chief of staff for former Governor Kate Brown. He was also the state's then chief of fire protection. Evan Watson brings us the story.
Feeling of regret that we had that call, we had a chance, then 1 million acres burned.
Nick Blosser, former Oregon Governor Kate Brown's chief of staff, took notes after his call with power companies on Labor Day in 2020.
We'll never forget that conversation on September 7th. And this whole thing is a tragedy. I think I felt like maybe because it was a tragedy, we had a chance to maybe prevent it, and we're not successful.
Wildfires ravaged Oregon, and now a group of 17 plaintiffs are blaming Pacific Power in a class action lawsuit. Wednesday's testimony focused on a conversation between power companies, Blosser, and Doug Graff, Oregon's former chief of fire protection, who said the Santiam Canyon was at great risk.
Power shutoffs would have prevented future power line fires across the state.
Blosser testified that he was discouraged that power companies, including Pacific Power, weren't more willing to cut the lights. But Pacific Power argues power shutoffs were unheard of in Oregon at the time, and there are serious risks with turning off electricity for communities at risk of wildfires.
I imagine that's a complex decision given the need for reliable services, electricity.
Blosser also said he never specifically asked power companies to de-energize because he believed he didn't have that authority.
We actually could not explicitly order them to shut the power off, so we had to figure out how to do everything but that in order to try to affect the same outcome.
Beyond power shutoffs, the Multnomah County jury will decide whether 4 of the Labor Day fires were started by Pacific Power lines or other factors, even though state and federal investigations are ongoing. Evan Watson, KGW News.
Thanks, Evan. And for those of you who are Pacific Power or PacifiCorp customers, you might be wondering, what's this mean to me? What's it mean if they lose? Will the rates go up? Well, we don't know the answer for sure. The utilities are regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, so they would have to ask permission to do that first. It's an issue, though, that we're working on, and we'll bring you a report once we dig into it and learn some more. Still to come on the story. We just couldn't ignore the weather today. What a day. Take a look out the window at the Wells Fargo camera. Sure feels like summer out there. So we sent Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino outside to have a little fun, soak in some sun, and bring us the forecast. Stick around. We'll talk with Matt right after this.
Straight ahead at 6:30, Oregon Secretary of State moonlighting for a troubled cannabis chain. Why that's raising ethical concerns and some calls to resign. Plus, an update in the search for a skipper spotted steering his vessel over sea lions in the Columbia. And Oregon's elementary school principal of the year from right here in the Rose City. Details next at 6:30. Hope to see you then.
Record-breaking day. Let's talk about the weather. I know you're feeling it. Matt Zafino is out there. Matt, I feel like I went to sleep in Oregon and woke up in Arizona. Does climate change have anything to do with all of this?
You know, most likely, Pat. I mean, climate change really has its fingerprints on a lot of our weather. And when we get a hot day like this, it begs the question quite a bit. I'm at Willamette Park right now where everybody and their dog, I mean, literally everybody and their dog getting on paddle boards and kayaks. We've seen like 6 dogs so far get out there on the water, which is great to see. But back to your question, I've got a graphic here for you from the folks at Climate Central showing April warming in Portland, which is interesting because this is our second April in a row that's been pretty cold. I mean, up until, you know, the last couple of days, our April's been chilly. It's been one of the coldest we've had. And so that's, you see the thin line behind the solid line, that's the annual variation. So every April, some are warm, some are cold. But if you do a best fit line, and that's what the thick line is through last year, we have seen April, the average high temperature go up 1.8 degrees, 2 degrees. That's quite a bit. And I think when we add in this April, it may actually go down a little bit because this has been, up until the last few days, a pretty cold April. But when you look at this, since 1970, our April has been getting warmer. And this is a story we're seeing for several months of the year, not just in April. Now, I want to show you another graphic. It's called the Climate Shift Index, again, from the folks at Climate Central. And what they do is they assign a likelihood as to what is the likelihood that climate change is having an impact on the weather on any given day, or at least making the type of weather we're having happen more frequently. And this day, today, sits at a number 2 on the Climate Shift Index, which means it is likely that climate change is having an influence on the weather that we are having today and helping to jack our high temperatures just a little bit. And it may not be by much, but by a little bit. You can see the index goes up to a 5. We're not there. We're only at a 2. And we've had warmer days in April, not many. This is one of the warmest April days we've ever had. But again, it just does, it points to the fact, Pat, that climate change is something we're living with more and more.
These graphics are super interesting, Matt, and you never disappoint when we say, give us some cool, nerdy, technical stuff. But here's a general question. Do you think it's going to keep going that way, or is it going to go down and stay down?
In the immediate future, the forecast, I mean, look, we still have a ton of natural variation in the system. So climate change doesn't mean it's always going to be hot, but it does mean that when we get hot, we may get hotter, and we're going to see these hot spells happen more frequently. I had some interesting questions too, Pat, on my social media channel. Somebody asked me, hey, is this another heat dome like we had back in 2021? No, this is not that. I mean, several differences. First of all, this isn't nearly as hot. It's not going to last nearly as long. And this is April, not June. So the time of year has an impact as well. So we're not going to see that. We're going to be in the low 80s tomorrow. Then we cool off again. And I don't see any more 80s on the immediate horizon for at least the next week and probably longer. So no, this is not going to be what the rest of our spring is like, but it is interesting to get this early preview of summer-like weather.
Oh, super interesting. Thanks, Matt. I learned a lot right there. Appreciate it. Hey, stick around. We're going to finish things right after this. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching, and remember, the story, our collective story, that never ends. Enjoy your weekend. I'll see you on Monday.